Our story begins with our hero, Rude, known as the only adventurer in the world capable of breaking prohibitions. Here, we see Rude standing and eating the raw flesh of a monster he has slain. At this moment, we see that Rude's hand is broken and his back is severely injured. However, moments later, the wound on his back begins to heal. At this moment, we see Rude acquiring the roar skill and the battle axe skill. After that, he roars and all his wounds heal. At that time, many monsters appear in front of him. Rude readies his weapon, and we learn that in this world, it has been recorded by a noble that eating monsters is forbidden because anyone who does so will absorb evil essence. Meanwhile, Rude continues to slay the monsters attacking him and suddenly feels the first effect of eating the monster, which is a great surge of energy that allows him to easily fight off many monsters. However, the second symptom begins to appear: severe headaches, dizziness, and poisoning. These symptoms keep Rude in place without attacking, and he tells himself that he will take revenge on those who threw him into this place. At that moment, the third symptom that should appear is poisoning and sudden death. However, for Rude, the situation is different because he does not die but rather transforms into a monster by absorbing the evil essence. Rude becomes very strong and starts brutally killing and eating all the monsters around him. Every time he eats a monster, he gains new skills like evaluation, sound awareness, and absorption. Meanwhile, the problem does not end because a large snake appears in front of Rude. Rude takes a bite from the wolf he has killed and gains agility and jumping skills. Then he leaps at high speed towards the snake, thrusts his spear into it, and uses his golden lightning skill to attack the snake. Rude continues his journey after killing the snake, and as usual, every bite of a monster gives him new skills. Rude then takes a short break, and we see that he has killed all the monsters in that place and feels happy because this way, he can survive. However, unfortunately, he does not have time to rest because he sees a large number of other monsters in front of him. Rude is shocked by the number and continues to curse the monsters, saying that no matter what happens, he will return alive and go back to his home. To understand everything, let's go back in time a bit, specifically to the city of Balon, located on the border. We know that this city is special because there are many labyrinths, one of which is the Swamp Labyrinth, which is very difficult. After all, the air inside has a very negative effect on adventurers who enter. Therefore, it is natural that every adventurer hates this labyrinth. However, our hero, Rude, is different from other adventurers because he often enters this labyrinth and is even known as the Swamp Explorer. At that time, Rude was very happy to be in the labyrinth because he found many swamp plants that usually only existed on the 6th floor of the labyrinth. These plants are very useful for purifying swamp air and are a source of income for Rude. Rude continues to pick the plants until he has gathered enough to last for 3 days. Rude starts moving to exit the labyrinth, but suddenly he hears a sound nearby and sees a swamp rat that can use poison like other monsters in the swamp. Most adventurers avoid fighting these rats. The rats start emitting poison gas from their mouths, but Rude is unaffected because he is different from other adventurers. He uses his sword to fight the rats and manages to kill them, but then another group of rats attacks him. 2 rats attack Rude, but he manages to kill one of them. However, the other rat jumps onto his hand, and Rude struggles against it. Fortunately, at that moment, another adventurer arrives and uses a fireball to kill the rat. Rude falls to the ground, surprised by the explosion in front of him. The adventurer who used the fireball approaches Rude and says that he tried to help him. Rude thanks him without enthusiasm and says that the adventurer should have informed him before doing anything because he was almost hurt. The adventurer responds that he shouted fireball very loudly to try to get Rude's attention. Their conversation is interrupted by a third adventurer who says to his friends that he has found a field of swamp plants. His friends are very happy to hear this and say that they are very lucky today. Rude feels strange about the incident and asks if they followed him to find the field. The short adventurer looks nervous and says that they just happened to meet and help Rude. They shout that Rude did not even thank them for their help and deserve punishment. The 3 adventurers prepare to hit Rude. Rude feels angry and confused but finally apologizes and thanks them. Time passes until night falls, and we see Rude in a restaurant called Full Belly. There, 2 people hold Rude and hit him, saying that his presence in the restaurant makes the place stink. One of them approaches Rude and uses his ability to emit fire from his hands, saying that an adventurer should have the ability to defeat monsters. However, since Rude only has the skill to remove negative effects, he is not considered a true adventurer. At that time, we learn that Rude's unique skill is the ability to detoxify, which is very useful for exploring swamps but not enough to defeat monsters. Because of this, no team wants to recruit him, and everyone calls him the Swamp Explorer because he only searches for resources in the early parts of the swamp. Rude leaves the restaurant feeling very disappointed because he is considered a failure as an adventurer. He enters the guild and is surprised to see the place crowded, which is unusual. The officer sees him and asks if he needs something. Upon seeing his face, the officer recognizes Rude and tells him that a new labyrinth has been discovered. Rude feels excited because new labyrinths are usually full of treasures and magical items, which is a great opportunity for adventurers. Rude then realizes the reason for the crowded place and is not surprised. The officer continues by saying that the price of the swamp plants Rude sells will drop from 100 coins to only 30 coins. Rude is shocked and angry to hear this and asks why. The officer explains that the swamp labyrinth is not very popular, and now with the new labyrinth, the demand for swamp plants has dropped drastically because no one wants to enter the swamp labyrinth. Rude falls silent and is shocked to hear the officer's explanation that the new labyrinth is in the Ophelio Mountains and he is not allowed to enter it. Rude asks why, and the officer explains that one of the requirements to enter the labyrinth is that the adventurer must be at least Class D. However, since Rude is currently in Class E, he does not qualify to enter. Rude feels even angrier and more frustrated and asks if there is any other way to get in. The officer replies that it is the rule, and if Rude tries to enter, he will die. At that moment, Rude hears someone speaking to him. He looks in the direction of the voice and finds someone offering to join his team as a porter. Rude does not think long and agrees to the offer. Sometime later, they ride a horse-drawn carriage and depart for the labyrinth. On the journey, the team members feel bored because of the dull journey. The team leader speaks to Rude and says that he is glad Rude joined because they had difficulty finding a porter. Rude agrees that finding a porter is indeed difficult because most adventurers gather in the new labyrinth. Another team member asks why the team leader chose Rude when many others are better. Rude has been an adventurer for a long time, and surely he is more experienced than the newcomers. After that, Bayer introduces himself to Rude and says, "My name is Bayer, and I am the leader of the Red Sword Party. This girl is Sasha, and this boy is Rick. The three of us are adventurers from this class." Rude also introduces himself and says that he is an adventurer from Class A. Bayer then responds, "Before we go any further, I want to see your guild card to know your abilities." Rude listens and shows his guild card, which displays all his traits and abilities in front of them. Bayer looks at the traits and asks if Rude can use fire magic. Rude answers, "I can use it, but the fire effect is very weak against monsters, so I only use it for cooking." Bayer is a bit disappointed but tries to comfort him and says, "The skill will still be useful, and we can rely on you." The team then continues their journey and finally arrives at the labyrinth. They get off the carriage and are impressed by the view of the labyrinth from the outside. Bayer tells the team, "Get ready, we have finally arrived at this new labyrinth." The team is very excited, and Sasha observes that the place is very quiet and says, "It seems we are the first ones to get here." Rick replies, "If so, let's get in quickly to explore it first." They entered the labyrinth, but they were surprised to find the place crowded with people gathering all the treasures inside. Sasha was angry about the crowd, and Bayer remarked that it seemed like the entire first floor had been explored. Rick suggested, "What if we go deeper into the labyrinth? There must be fewer adventurers there." Sasha quickly agreed without thinking, but Rude reminded them that this was a new labyrinth and they should map it out first. Rick and Sasha were annoyed with Rude and said, "You're just a pack mule, you're useless for anything else because you're old from the A rank." Bayer tried to calm the situation and told Rick and Sasha that Rude wasn't entirely wrong. However, he also proposed that they should search for treasures because they were right. They continued their journey to the fourth floor, and suddenly a wolf appeared and attacked Rude. Rude was terrified, but Rick quickly intervened and killed the wolf with a single blow. Rick smiled at Rude and said, "Try not to be afraid of weak monsters like this." Meanwhile, Sasha and Bayer were also fighting other wolves. Rude was impressed by Bayer's strength and wanted to join the battle, but his body wouldn't move, which frustrated him. After some time, the team managed to defeat all the wolves in the area. Sasha said that coming here was the right decision because they were now alone. Bayer was also pleased and put a ring on his finger, saying that the monsters here weren't too strong and they had managed to get good treasures. Rick called out to Rude loudly and said, "Come on, gather the loot from the monsters I killed." Rude replied that he wouldn't collect anything because the magic stones were likely damaged. Rick got angry and said, "You better listen, because those stones might not be damaged." Rude felt a bit pressured but was forced to listen to Rick. He went to the first wolf and found it severely damaged and smelling terrible. Rude lit a fire in his hand and burned part of the wolf, hoping the situation would improve. Rick saw this and mocked him, saying that Rude might be cooking the wolf to eat it. Rick then realized he was hungry after exploring for a long time and started thinking about eating the wolf meat. Sasha told him to stop saying disgusting things because eating monster meat was considered taboo and no one knew what could happen. Rick smiled and said he was just joking and would buy better food. However, suddenly there was a loud noise and high pressure that made the whole team feel pain. At that moment, a minotaur appeared and leaped towards them. The team was shocked to see it because they couldn't believe there was a minotaur on such a low floor. Rude was also surprised and wondered why a B-rank monster was here. The minotaur started moving towards the adventurers, and Rick and Sasha were very scared, saying that they had no way to defeat such a monster. Bayer took a bag of treasures and told Rude, "I want you to watch the monster's movements." Rude was worried and asked if Bayer had a plan. Bayer smiled slyly and held his sword, saying that he had a great plan. He then attacked Rude with his sword, shocking Rude. Bayer told Rick and Sasha to proceed with their plan. Rick used a skill to motivate the warriors and threw an axe near Rude, making the Minotaur target Rude. Sasha used a skill to speed up the three of them except for Rude so they could escape quickly. Rude finally understood their plan and asked if they had intended to do this from the beginning. Bayer laughed evilly and said, "Why do you think we brought someone like you?" Rude was furious and watched them escape, leaving him behind. He screamed in anger and cursed them as the Minotaur raised its axe to attack Rude. Rude stood in place, very scared. However, he managed to dodge the attack, causing the Minotaur's axe to fall to the ground. Rude smiled and wondered if dodging this attack would actually help or if he would still die. Suddenly, he felt very tired and thought this might be the end for him. The Minotaur attacked with its elbow to Rude's stomach, causing the ground beneath them to break and Rude to fall to the lower floor. Rude lost consciousness, but after some time, he opened his eyes and wondered if he was still alive or dead. He found the Minotaur lying beneath him, dead. Rude felt relieved but also hopeless, thinking that he would die here from bleeding or starvation. After some time, Rude was very hungry and started thinking about eating the Minotaur. However, he mocked his thoughts, thinking it would be a disaster. He closed his eyes, feeling sad about his miserable life. Suddenly, he remembered his father putting his hand on his shoulder when he was a child, saying that he should never give up no matter what happens. Rude jolted back to reality and started eating the Minotaur's meat ravenously because it was his only way to survive. He knew that eating a monster could cause someone to turn into a monster, but he had no choice. After eating the Minotaur's meat, unexpected changes happened to Rude. His appearance became terrifying, and he felt a new strength. In that place, bats were attacking Rude. He used a skill called Roar that emitted a horrible sound, scaring the bats. Many bats died because of the roar, while the others kept attacking Rude. However, Rude had changed. He used a physical enhancement skill, making his muscles grow bigger and his strength increase. With an axe in his hand, he attacked the bats, splitting them in two, and ate some of them. As explained earlier, he gained new skills from the bats. This echolocation ability was very useful in the dark because it made him like a bat, able to recognize all creatures around him easily. At that moment, the place was completely dark, and he saw some monsters moving towards Rude. Rude noticed the monsters and saw that they were coming in groups. He smiled and held his axe, saying, "Who will be eaten? Me or these monsters?" Soon, Rude attacked another Minotaur, cutting off its hands and neck and hitting the smaller monsters. During the battle, Rude realized that the war axe he carried suited him perfectly. Thanks to his bat-like abilities, he could now sense the presence of monsters without having to see them. Rude continued fighting and split another monster in two. The monster's eyes flew, and Rude stood in front of it, opened his mouth, and swallowed it. Although tired, because he had just eaten part of the monster, he felt his energy increase. He prepared himself, gripping his axe tightly, and ready to face the monsters coming at him with enthusiasm. After some time, Rude finished what he was doing and exited the labyrinth door. He couldn't believe that he had finally gotten out of that labyrinth. He threw his axe and said, "I finally got out of this labyrinth." Suddenly, he shouted, "I got out alive in the end and didn't die." On the other side, we moved to the Adventurers Guild, where there was a commotion and all the adventurers there were very sad. An old man stood in front of the team that Rude used to follow and said to them, "I understand from your words that you all fled the labyrinth and left Rude alone to die. We know that this man is named Lancaris, head of the Bellona Fire Guild branch." At that moment, he looked sad and said to Lancaris, "We fled as soon as we encountered the Minotaur, and Rude was killed before we could do anything for him." He continued with great emotion and said, "I wish we could go back in time to save him." At the same time, Sasha also pretended to cry, and Rick tried to comfort her. Lancaris tried to calm them and said, "I understand your situation," and then gave the order to temporarily ban entry into the labyrinth. At that moment, a guild employee was sitting there and listening to the conversation very bored. But a few seconds later, he saw something in front of him and was shocked. It turned out that Rude was still alive and entered through the guild door. Everyone there couldn't believe it because they thought he was dead. Of course, Bayer and his team were very angry and disappointed. Even Lancaris was surprised. Quickly, Bayer continued his act, running towards Rude and asking if he was okay. Then he got closer and said, "If you say anything unnecessary, you will be killed." Rick and Sasha also pretended to be happy that Rude was still alive and said, "We planned to come back and look for you, but unfortunately the labyrinth was already closed." Rude remained standing in his place without uttering a word. Bayer tried to divert attention and said to everyone, "Let's celebrate now because Rude isn't dead after all." Bayer and Rick tried to move Rude to the celebration venue, but they were surprised when Rude stayed put and refused to move at all. Suddenly, Rude spoke loudly and revealed that the team had used him as bait. Bayer was very worried about Rude's words, and everyone in the guild was shocked. Bayer quickly approached him nervously and said, "What are you talking about?" Lancaris stopped Bayer and asked Rude to explain what he meant by bait. Rude responded and told them that Bayer had stolen all his belongings and even attacked him from behind. Rude also said that Rick used his abilities to make the Minotaur target him, while Sasha used a speed spell to escape. Bayer continued to feign innocence and told Lancaris that Rude was lying. Lancaris didn't believe him and said, "Wait here, everyone. We will find out the truth now." At that moment, a woman who looked like a sorceress entered the room. Bayer and his team were shocked and frightened to see her because she was a truth enforcer who rarely left the capital city of the kingdom. Lancaris informed the team that he had noticed many porters dying, so he requested the truth enforcer to come here. Bayer's team grew even more terrified upon hearing this. Lancaris immediately asked the truth enforcer to reveal who was lying. Her eyes glowed blue, and she said that Bayer's team was lying. Then she raised her glowing staff and declared that Rude was telling the truth. Bayer was furious and didn't know what to do. All the adventurers in the room were also angry at the team. Suddenly, Bayer shouted, "How could the truth enforcer know this when she wasn't there?" Lancaris was surprised by the question and said, "You know she has the power of truth. We saw some information about this ability and found that it was very rare and powerful." Lancaris stared at Bayer and said, "No lie can escape this ability." He then asked, "How can we not trust someone who uses their abilities for the good of the country?" Bayer began to sweat in fear, and Lancaris continued, "Abandoning a team member is a forbidden act. Bayer's team deliberately used Rude as bait to be killed. Therefore, your team will be punished. You will no longer be adventurers and will become slaves." Sasha and Rick couldn't believe it and began to cry because they didn't want to become slaves. Bayer hung his head and tensely said, "If I'm going to be a slave, I have to do something first." He glared at the truth enforcer with hateful eyes, then quickly drew his sword and leaped to attack her. However, Rude didn't let it happen, running and standing in front of the truth enforcer to protect her. Rude said to Bayer, "I will never let you touch even a hair on the truth enforcer's head." Bayer was shocked that Rude could stop his attack. Rude then hit Bayer so hard that his teeth broke, and Bayer was thrown against the wall. Everyone was astonished by Rude's strength. After some time, Rude went to the guild's reception room with Lancaris and a staff member. Lancaris spoke to Rude and apologized for the inconvenience. Rude replied that it was no problem and asked what would happen to Bayer's team. Lancaris informed him that the three had been arrested and would be interrogated. If it was proven that they used porters as bait, all their assets would be confiscated and their rights as adventurers revoked. The assets would become Rude's property. A staff member handed a bag of money to Rude. Lancaris told Rude that the bag contained around 200,000 coins and asked Rude to take it. Rude was very happy and couldn't believe it, then took the bag and left the reception room. He hugged the money bag joyfully because now he could cover many living expenses. He said to himself, "If I relied on swamp plants, it would take me a long time to get this amount of money. Now I realize that adventurers can make a lot of money." He looked at the adventurers around him and was amazed because no one insulted or bothered him. This was because they had all seen what Rude had done earlier. Rude decided not to stand out because his sudden increase in strength could make people suspicious. He said, "The best solution right now is to return to the swamp and earn money as usual." He tried not to feel down and reminded himself that he had earned enough money and should buy good equipment and his favorite food. After leaving that place, Rude went to the equipment store and was surprised to find a magic bag priced at 200,000 coins. Because of the price, he decided to buy food instead. The day passed, and the next day, Rude went to the swamp labyrinth and easily killed the rats there. He said to himself, "I remember 2 days ago, I couldn't defeat 5 rats at once." Then he used his exploration eye ability, which he acquired after eating a small monster's eye. Rude was surprised to find that he could now easily kill level 9 rats. He began to wonder how far his strength had developed. Here, he took out his status card and checked it, and was very surprised to see that his level had reached 42 and all his attributes had significantly increased. Rude couldn't believe it because his level yesterday morning was still at the previous level. He then thought that this was very rare and decided to look at his skills as well. Quickly, he opened his skill list and was very happy because his skills had increased significantly. At that moment, Rude remembered something. When he returned from the new labyrinth, he saw the destroyed wall back to normal. Therefore, he wanted to return to the labyrinth again and find out what had happened there, but unfortunately, the labyrinth was temporarily closed. So, he decided to continue in the swamp labyrinth and see what was on the deeper floors. He also remembered that the magic bag was a joke item and decided that he had to choose the right monster to test his strength. Rude entered the 6th floor and there he easily killed monsters. He continued what he was doing until he finally reached the 133rd floor. There, he saw that the monsters were too weak for him and not suitable for testing his strength, so he went deeper into the labyrinth floors to find more suitable monsters. He reached the 24th floor, which looked more organized, and saw an armored monster with a very strong weapon. At that moment, Rude hid and used his investigation skills on the monster. He saw all its attributes and skills and learned that the monster was a level 25 chameleon warrior. Rude felt strange and said that this monster usually fought in coordination with its friends, but now there was only one in front of him. After that, he smiled and said he would test his new abilities on this monster. Quickly, he drew his sword and leaped to attack. The chameleon noticed Rude's attack but couldn't dodge it, and the attack hit its hand. Rude smiled and told the chameleon that its level wasn't bad, but he warned that the next attack would be deadly. Suddenly, Rude didn't have time to attack because the chameleon ran away from him. Rude found it very strange that the chameleon was running away from him, so he quickly chased it and told it to stop. After a while of chasing, Rude saw that they had reached a dead end. He told the chameleon that there was nowhere left to run. However, the chameleon smiled slyly. Rude felt something was wrong with that look, and when he looked back, he realized he was trapped in the chameleon's trap because 2 more chameleons appeared. Rude was very worried and knew he was in a difficult situation despite their different levels. At that moment, the first chameleon started moving and attacked Rude, but Rude quickly dodged the attack. He decided to fight them one by one. First, he attacked the first chameleon, which struggled to withstand his sword strike and fell to the ground. Rude took advantage of the moment and attacked again to finish it off, but unfortunately, another chameleon came and stopped the attack just in time. Rude was surprised and at the same time noticed that the third chameleon was coming to attack him from behind. Quickly, Rude moved and managed to dodge the attack at the last second, making the chameleon angry. Rude smiled and told the chameleon that the attack almost killed him. Suddenly, Rude found himself surrounded by many chameleons. He felt very nervous and thought that they were now coordinating their attacks well and even planning strategies. He remembered that before they attacked, he heard a loud noise from the chameleon. At that moment, Rude couldn't think because they immediately attacked him. Rude stood his ground to withstand their attacks and saw that there was a larger chameleon behind them that wasn't doing anything. At that moment, he used his investigation skills on the chameleon and found that it was level 32 and had leadership skills. Rude was very happy and smiled because he finally found his leader. At that moment, the chameleon shouted, giving orders to its followers. The followers obeyed the orders and attacked Rude again. Rude stood in front of them and used his physical motivation skills, massively increasing his strength. He shouted and ran among the monsters. As he ran towards the leader, he saw a chameleon in front of him, so he jumped over its head and said that the leader would die now. Rude reached the leader and attacked him in the chest, but he was shocked to see that his attack had no effect. The leader looked at him and drew his sword to stab Rude. Rude was very worried because he might not be able to dodge the attack, but then he used the skill he had obtained from eating spiders, the iron body. He laughed and told the leader that he wasn't the only one with a hidden ace. At that moment, the chameleon leader suddenly stopped and retreated. Rude felt strange and didn't know what was happening, so he used his investigation skills to find out. He discovered that the chameleon leader couldn't strengthen his skin, which was very odd since Rude's previous attack had no effect. Rude quickly realized that the ability came from someone else's power. He quickly continued to use his skills and looked at all the monsters, but found none with special abilities. Suddenly, he saw a wounded chameleon with the same attack pattern he had used on the leader. When he used his investigation skills on the chameleon, he found that it had a substitute skill. Rude understood that if he injured one of them, the damage would be transferred to another. Without waiting any longer, he immediately attacked the chameleon and stabbed it in the stomach, saying that now the chameleon could no longer be a substitute. He then turned to the leader and said not to take his actions personally. The leader was very angry because his plan had failed, so he and his followers immediately attacked Rude. However, before they could reach Rude, he used his thread manipulation skills and released threads from his hands, using them to climb to the ceiling. The monsters were surprised by Rude's movement. Rude continued to release threads from both hands and told the monsters that gathering together would only make things easier for him. Using his skills, he threw a net over all of them. The group leader was shocked and tried to order them to move, but unfortunately, the net was very strong and immobilized them completely. Finally, Rude descended and looked at the leader, saying that he had won. Quickly, he cut off the leader's head. At that moment, Rude had killed all the chameleons in the place, so he sheathed his sword on his back and smiled, saying it was time to eat. Rude prepared the magic bag he had bought and used it. The bag had the advantage that the space inside could expand with magic so the owner could put anything in it, and once the bag was closed, the weight of the items inside disappeared. Rude put his hand into the bag and took out some cooking utensils and spices. Then, he started cutting up the monsters he had killed as if they were edible animals. He recalled being in a new labyrinth and eating monsters just to survive, but now he would do something he enjoyed, cooking monsters. After finishing cutting up the monsters, he put the meat into a pot over the fire and added spices. After a while, the meat was cooked and Rude took it to start eating. He was very happy and satisfied with the delicious taste of the food. He devoured his meal heartily and said who would have thought that monster meat could taste so good. He also said that he was now officially addicted to monster meat. By eating monsters, Rude gained new skills such as single-handed combat, shield arts, swamp resistance, and leadership skills. Rude thought and wondered if these skills would be truly useful to him. And about his strength, what would he do? The important thing was that time passed with him. Rude was at level 211 of the Swamp Labyrinth, which contained a swarm of butterflies and fierce frogs. However, Rude used the Swamp Wolf skill and gathered his energy, using Lightning Cloak on those monsters and electrocuting them to death. Rude smiled as he did so and said that this skill was very useful. He also realized that these monsters were adept at infecting enemies with diseases, but unfortunately, they chose the wrong opponent. After that, Rude took out a pan and decided to cook frog and butterfly meat. After finishing cooking, he ate the frog meat and found that it was tender. He was very impressed with the spices he always used because they made the food taste even better. Meanwhile, Rude acquired poison skills, temperature resistance, paralysis powder, poison powder, and wind cutting skills. Suddenly, Rude heard a crashing sound beside him that came from a human. He was very surprised at that moment and wondered if there were adventurers who had managed to get this far in the labyrinth. After that, he ate the last piece of meat he had and packed all his tools into the bag so he could move. Indeed, he moved quickly and told himself that it was very rare for someone to reach this deep level in the labyrinth, and he felt lucky if he could exchange a little information with them. On the other hand, we approached the sound and saw a man named Safe who was bleeding. There was a team of 4 people standing in front of a girl who had fallen and was injured.